Welcome back to Fast Market here on the Schwab Network. Before we get to our next guest, I wanted to some breaking news here. According to the Wall Street Journal, Boeing exploring the sale of its NASA business, including the Starliner space vehicle and operations that support the ISS, or the International Space Station. Seeing a little pop. Boeing was just negative when we started the show, now up about 0.7%. That's part of their strategy that the new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, streamlining the company, stemming losses at this. So another asset sale here in Boeing. So keep this one on your radar, getting a little bit of spike intraday here in the shares on that news if it comes to fruition. All right, now it's time to bring in our next guest. That's going to be Megan Brantley, Vice President of Research at Likefolio. Welcome back to the show, Megan.
Thanks for having me, guys. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. So we're giving you Apple today. The stock got downgraded today. The market today said you're wrong to the analyst, and the stock's up. It's up over 20% so far this year. Do you guys have the data? Because if I hear one more firm come out and say, hey, Apple iPhone sales are weaker than last year, now they're higher than last year, China's doing good, China's doing bad, I want to hear your data. What do you guys have?
Yeah, so it's interesting because if you look at the headlines, you'd expect, a pretty low bar for Apple heading into its earnings event next week. But when you look at the stock, you see, actually, no, the bar's pretty high. The market is still betting on Apple for now. And we see that, maybe things aren't going to be as bad as the headlines are predicting. We still see pretty strong consumer interest in Apple's new round of iPhones, its iPhone 16. Whenever we look at mentions of consumers who are talking about, maybe upgrading to a new iPhone or purchasing a new iPhone, we actually see those mentions slightly elevated versus last year. Web visits at large are relatively flat, but you could see that as better than down. So whenever we look at things a bit muted, but perhaps a bit better than expected, a lot of consumers are talking about, interest in that iOS 18 update, understanding what these big, Apple Intelligence upgrades will look like. So I think that there's still a lot to be determined here. But from consumers, I think a big part of the downgrade was fear that consumers would splurge or they would hold off and wait for that iPhone SE model versus getting an iPhone 16, 16 Pro, 16 Pro Max. And we just aren't seeing that. Whenever we look at this, we see a lot of consumers who say, okay, maybe I'm getting the iPhone 16 Pro instead of the Pro Max, but we don't see this major hold off for consumers who were at least ready to upgrade this iPhone 16 cycle. So heading into this, I guess you could say that's a glass half full take on Apple heading into this earnings event. We don't have as much insight into China, but at least from the U.S. consumer, Apple is still king here when it comes to mobile devices, and we still do see some signs of optimism for this cycle.
Megan, there's a little discussion, and then there's a much bigger discussion going on about Apple, and a lot of the news is fairly good. Their subscription revenue and AI expectations and the potential expansion of margins and the super cycle. I don't know how many supers we're putting on there, but the next super cycle of iPhones. There's a lot of good news. But also, if you look at the stock in the last 6 months, it's up 34%. It's a lot for a big company like that to go to $3.5 trillion valuation. So we find ourselves here with this discussion of it's different this time. AI is going to raise margins all over, and all these PEs can expand. Well, if you're as old as me, you know that it's really never different this time. So, Megan, is there a chance that all this good news that Apple has in your data, can it lead to the valuations that we have now or higher? Because the downgrade today talked about expectations and valuations. That was his reason for the downgrade. Your thoughts?
I think that it's how you look at things short term and how you look at things long term for Apple. For us heading into this earnings event, partially due to the expectations, how the stock has moved over the last year, and the data that we're seeing, we're neutral heading into this event. We think that it's priced about right as is. We could experience some near-term volatility, but long-term, we think that Apple's visual intelligence, the Apple intelligence, the impacts of effectively leveraging AI makes that ecosystem even stickier and makes its services even stickier. And we know that right now, Apple already touts over 1 billion subscribers to one of its subscription options. And so as Apple improves its ecosystem and makes its experience even better, we do see, long-term upside from here. So we would certainly be a buyer of any pullback that we see in the near term. But certainly heading into this earnings event, our data doesn't have enough positive momentum for us to be taking a bet to the upside.
Yeah, Megan, and on your one chart, as far as web visits goes, I kind of wanted to hit on that one a little bit because I think that's really key because you look at, historically in the Q4, maybe you have that euphoria of when they released the iPhone, kind of stabilizes a little bit, and then you see another ramp up going into holiday shopping season. I know my family, give me a list before November 1st on what Apple products you want because they're going to be probably hard to get. Is that always what trends as far as your data goes where, hey, this is definitely one of the big items that people are shopping for into the holidays? And going into earnings next year, what's your earnings score or next week?
Yeah, so whenever we look at this, the web visits you'll see are extremely seasonal on that chart on the right. And that big peak that you see is when they announce their new product lineup. And the iPhone is the big mover here. And what's interesting is whenever you look at this chart, we haven't necessarily seen that little bit of a pullback, that lag between iPhone announced and then heading into the holiday season. We're still kind of trending up. We're starting to see some flattening of the curve, but it'll be certainly important to track and watch to see are consumers splurging for those gifts, like you mentioned, maybe the lower price, maybe not an iPhone, but maybe the iPad, an Apple Watch, AirPods, things like that. And so we'll be listening for that because we do think that these are typically, some of the hottest items under consumers' tree. But in the big picture, the iPhone is really, really important for Apple. It drives about 46% of its revenue. I think that a lot of the doubts coming in are from people who are really doubting whether consumers are going to splurge and whether they're going to upgrade this cycle. We do see signs that they are upgrading, but again, not enough positive momentum, not enough growth at large for us to make a bet to the upside. Our score is almost exactly neutral. I would say it might lean a little bit bullish, but not much. I think we're in the single digits. I don't think that we've actually put out our earnings sheet for next week yet, so I can't cite a score specifically right off the top of my head, but I can tell you that we're neutral heading into this event. But we do see some room for optimism long-term for Apple because we do think that this Apple intelligence could be a big driver for the company. I know next week, even Monday, is going to be a major event for Apple as they start to, I think it's the week of Mac, and they're announcing product upgrades there. And so it'll be really interesting to see next week how Apple trades between Monday and Thursday when the company releases earnings, because I think that could really dictate a lot in how we approach this name.
Yeah, the Senior Vice President of Marketing put out something on Twitter yesterday that starting on Monday, mark your calendars, exciting week ahead as they release that iOS that has all the Apple features. And Citigroup just came out with a note and they said that the beta for the new iOS was delivered to the developers and they included a lot of the AI functionality except for Siri. That's going to be delayed till 2025. So we've got that. All right, great stuff, great data as always, Megan. Have a great weekend.